The Latino Torah Center presents the Chavurah Online, a community of like-minded individuals who are learning about Judaism and exploring topics related to Jewish living and coming from a crypto-Jewish background. On this episode, we would discuss holistic Jewishness based on the book Who is a Jew by Rabbi Juan Bejarano Gutierrez. David Ben Joseph, our host, will explore some of the concepts in that book. Welcome to another edition of the Chavurah Online, brought to you by the Latino Torah Center. We're going to be discussing today holistic Jewishness, and by what I mean by that is, where does our Jewish identity come from? From what elements and what things are important to our Jewish identity? I know I've been talking a lot about that in the last two episodes. The reason that we're going about this issue in a roundabout way is because we're trying to get on the same page. We have people from different backgrounds. We have people who are B'nai Anusim, crypto Jews, people who are new to Judaism, people who have been studying Judaism for many years, people who come from other backgrounds. So we're trying to get everybody on the same page. And the biggest thing that Judaism teaches is that education is the key. So if you're not part of the normative Jewish community, or you haven't been fully integrated, this is a place where you're welcome, where you are accepted, where you are supported, and where we can discuss the things that are important to Jews and Judaism. And again, we're offering a welcoming hand to anybody who wants to join the Jewish people. There's always paths to get there, but the educational component is what we believe is the greatest way to achieve that. So I'm going to read for you guys a paper regarding Jewish identity that really addresses what is our stance, and then we can discuss it. We only have one student today; the other two people are unavailable. But we will like to in the comment section on YouTube, if you can please give us your thoughts. And also on Facebook, we started a discussion with the people that couldn't make it to the class, but we're going to be watching it once it's over. So feel free to share your thoughts. Okay, so we embrace the traditional definition of Jewish identity, but we have to understand the modern world that we deal with it. And Jewishness cannot be reduced purely to a legal status. That's what the Orthodox community that I've been talking about for the last couple of shows, they want to make it only halachic. So if halachically speaking, someone's Jewish because their mother is Jewish or because they converted halachically, and that's it. But the individual is very complex, and the communities that we're part of are very complex. So there's a scholar named Sasha Stern who notes that Jewish identity is a multifarious and holistic experience, which we can only be described with reference to the whole panoply of Jewish life. So everything that a Jew experiences in their life and their relationship with other Jews, their relationship with God, all that is what it means to be a Jew. So you can come from a halachic background and still not be experiencing all of what Jewish life has to offer, or you can be from outside of a Jewish halachic standpoint and be building a Jewish identity by being involved in the community, by praying regularly, by studying Jewish sources and creating a sense of Jewish thinking within your mind. So the matter of who's a Jew is a source of contention in contemporary Jewish society. In and outside of the land of Israel, there's debate and conflict about it. Modern perspectives include a variety of proposals on the question of who is a Jew. Some have chosen to articulate a definition of Jewishness purely in terms of the historic connection of the Jewish people to the land of Israel. So in Zionism, they're saying everybody who's there was at one point in Zionism they actually believed that anybody who wanted to live in the land of Israel would be considered Jewish to a certain extent. Now there's issues with that, but the land of Israel became like the source of their identity. Anybody who's involved, anybody who's supporting it, is part of the Jewish people. Others have chosen to define Jewishness in terms of race or ethnicity, in terms of cultural distinctiveness. So just like there's been a Chicano movement, African American movement, Asian movement within America, the Jewish community had tried to organize as Jews to have some type of ethnic identity. So when you see people going to Jewish camp or being part of the Jewish Community Center, that's trying to build some type of ethnic support for one another, just like there could be a Latino center or African American center. More traditionally inclined movements also maintain the definition of Jewishness based on classical approaches to halakha. So traditional Jews, Sephardim, and Ashkenazim, they focus on the legal ramifications of being a Jew. Each of these movements or perspectives provides justification for its definition of Jewish identity. So they all say that they know what it means to be a Jew based on their perspective. Each of these positions also encompasses a number of strengths and weaknesses which fail to fully appreciate the complexity of Jewish identity. The classical rabbinic perspective, when we speak of a rabbinic perspective, we get a lot of flack from YouTube about the rabbis and the Jews and the this and that, the Zionists, but Judaism is biblical, Talmudic perspective. It's like the Bible is, the Torah Sheba'al Peh, the Torah Sheba'al Peh is the oral law, and that would be the interpretation of it. And then there's the written law that is the Torah or the Tanakh. So we get our perspective from both the Bible and the interpretation of the rabbis. So if I talk about rabbinic perspective or biblical Talmudic, it's a fusion of both of those things. They have turned into classical Judaism throughout the ages. So we're not talking about any other different kind of so-called Judaisms, because all the other ones kind of create a lot of conflicts, and they have even bigger ways that they fall apart. And I know that there's a lot of people who have issues with Judaism overall. So for them, I hope they watch this class and they try to understand this before they make a judgment. The classical rabbinic perspective, since the time of the Mishnah, is that the view of who's a Jew is consistent. There hasn't been too many changes. Some people would debate that in the Bible, the Jewish identity is there's a different flow to it. You have women joining the Jewish people, and it doesn't talk specifically about some type of conversion. You have women who are not Jewish, and then you have women who are heathen, and the Jews get in trouble for participating in relationships with them. Then there's other women that are considered godly, even though they weren't Jewish, and they're incorporated into the community, such as Rahab. So, but since the time of the writing of the Talmud, there's been a consistent understanding that has to do through the matrilineal descent and not through the patrilineal or through the father. The criteria for Jewishness until the modern period remain strictly linked to the halachic definition, that's the Jewish law perspective, of the earliest proto-rabbinic circles. So this is the people before the rabbis. And the rabbis is usually the people who wrote the Talmud or the Mishnah. Before that, you have people like Shammai and Hillel. They're considered rabbis too, but in academic terms, they call them proto-rabbis. So because there's not a rabbinic system just yet. There's teachers and there's judges and there's law people, teachers of the law, but there's not a sense of it being such a strict system as it becomes later. And so the term rabbi means teacher, but in modern terms it means a judge or a halachic decider who's like a district attorney for the Jewish people. The argument for traditional Judaism is that both rabbinic and biblical law define Jewishness on the basis of matrilineal descent. So same thing about going from the mother. The emergence of the modern period and the rise of non-Orthodox Jewish movements have challenged the legitimacy and orthodoxy to define Jewishness on the basis of halakha alone. In one of these classes, we'll go through all the halakha means and how it works. It can be confusing. It can be very burdensome for some people to think that it's all about a legal system. But even in the U.S., we live in a legal system where every action has consequences, and every the way you live your life is all ruled by different guidelines. The greatest strength of this position perhaps lies in its longevity, so it does not appear to necessarily predate the early rabbinic period. But defining a Jew simply in terms of Jewish law alone is arguably problematic. If, for example, Jewishness is only defined by the status of one's mother, that definition can easily devolve into circular reasoning, since it fails to articulate what tangible characteristics actually define Jewishness apart from matrilineal descent. So there's people out there who say that, what's the point of being born Jewish if you don't do anything Jewish? So they're willing to throw everybody out unless they're keeping them as both or they're Orthodox or whatever. The issue with that is that, for me, the covenant, being part of the Jewish people, is something that it is it's like a privilege that is bestowed on someone, and whatever they do with it matters, but it's part of the system. So if you're a citizen of the United States and you don't participate in politics and you don't pay your taxes and you don't live here, you're still considered a citizen, but you're not in good standing. So it would be the same thing if you're a Jew, you were born of a Jewish mother, or you converted when you were young, whatever, and now you don't care. You're still considered a Jew because you're still part of the Jewish people, but you're not living up to the gift that was given to you at birth to be a nation of priests. So just for people to keep them in mind. And then usually the argument that's connected to that is like, there's all these people who want to live Jewish lives and they're not being allowed to. And that would count for crypto Jews or B'nai Noah, or anybody that loves God and wants to experience a holy life. They would say that they're being held back by people who are not willing to accept them. Well, you're not being held back because, as we were going to be discussing today, you can embrace certain elements and build up a Jewish identity. And I guess we're here to help you realize that and make that into something worthwhile. There are some people who believe that that's actually problematic, and there's some sources that would say that someone who's practicing Judaism without being a Jew is actually mocking it. And I've seen a lot of mocking of Jewish symbols and Jewish holy objects, but that's why we're here. We're here to help people understand the sacredness of Judaism, the sacredness of our tradition, and help them appreciate it, embrace it, and build up a true sanctified way of participating in Jewish life. But what we're saying regarding, if it's only through the mother, then it's not a free-for-all once you're in. According to this definition, a mother might transmit Jewish identity to her children and their offspring for subsequent generations without any action or knowledge of what Jewish life entails, be it religious, cultural, linguistic, or otherwise. That is an important case when regarding to the Anusim, because a lot of people try to dismiss the crypto-Jewish identity, saying, well, they haven't been part of the Jewish community throughout so many years, so they've lost complete connection. And according to Jewish law, someone can be a Jew and be taken captive and be indoctrinated in a different religion and still hold that identity because of this idea that it was a covenant that was made with their ancestors and it was passed down to those generations. That would be the point of doing a return to Judaism versus a conversion, because the person was unwilling or the person did not have the knowledge of their full identity because they were under capture for many centuries. So the descendants would be provided an opportunity to return, because there was this idea of we want to be merciful and we want to provide some type of recourse for them to realize their true identity through the persecution and anti-Semitism they experienced. It's a very complicated issue. We'll discuss it further in the future, but I've written papers about that. There's discussions from Maimonides and other sages regarding that. And there's some issues that people bring up. The Zionist approach in the 19th century, the rise of nationalistic movement in Europe, affected Jewish groups seeking to reestablish a Jewish homeland in the light of continuing bigotry and anti-Semitism. So here you have people who were living among the nations, and the nations didn't want them, so they were fighting to have their own homeland. In a sense, crypto Jews are trying to recreate their spiritual homeland by coming back to their traditions of their ancient past. The Zionist movement perceived Jewish identity in the same manner that their nationalist contemporaries saw peoplehood. So in the, since the French Revolution, people have been talking about what does it mean to be a citizen of a country? What does it mean to be a part of a nationhood or peoplehood? That's what it became. It became like, we're building a nation from scratch, and everybody needs to be invested in it. And Judaism itself is a nation, and the Constitution is the Torah. So that's why you can be a Zionist and a religious person. A lot of people out there who say that there's a lot of problems with the state of Israel and this and that, and they want nothing to do with it, and that it confuses people from what does it mean to be a responsible religious Jewish person to being a member, a citizen of Israel. But there's people who do both. So again, very complicated issue. A nation was characterized by a distinct language, borders, culture, and history. So Jews, even though they were in exile for 2,000 years, they kept a distinct language, a culture, and a history. What we've been seeking throughout this time is to have our own borders. So just like the kingdoms of Judah and Israel existed, there's been a desire to reestablish that. Through many religious Zionists were instrumental at the formation of modern state of Israel, the majority of Israeli Jews today appear to embrace the definition of Jewish identity largely devoid of any religious connotation, and instead often designate Jewish identity as inseparable to the existence of the state and the Hebrew language and culture. So now it's replaced, membership to the state of Israel has replaced Jewish identity from a religious perspective. So that's why there's so many non-religious Jews in Israel. People throw that in our face, like, well, there's all these people who don't care about Judaism and they're still considered Jews. What about the people the other way around? Well, again, very complicated. One day I'll discuss what my research regarding the state of Israel, and it's so complex that you can't turn it into a soundbite or very short case for the state of Israel. You have to talk about the whole history about everything that's been happening. The position in extreme places a greater emphasis on importance on the truly astonishing events that have taken place in the course of the state of Israel's emergence than on a claim of Jewish faith that God initiated a covenant with the Jewish people in which the land of Israel holds a special role. So in Israel, they celebrate Hanukkah. Instead of celebrating the cleansing of the temple and the miracle of the menorah, they're celebrating Jewish independence. That was a time where the Jews were under foreign invasion, and they were able to drive back that group of the nations that was taken over. So it's the same thing for them and the way that they've been able to establish themselves. Nationalism cannot be, as there's another scholar, Jacobs, he says that nationalism cannot substitute religion. The revival of the Hebrew language and the rise of Hebrew literature, the creation of democratic state, etc., are, as Louis Jacob notes, truly incredible achievements. They do not and cannot, however, substitute for a view of Jewish identity that is centered on the service of God. A Zionistic approach to Jewish identity renders Jewish existence devoid of any meaning other than ethnic and historical ties of the Jewish people to their ancestral homeland, and thus offers no response to the question of Jewish purpose. Hence, most Israeli Jews and their non-Israeli Zionist counterparts abroad typically share apathy towards religious definition of Jewish identity, since they are not seen as integral. Another group who a lot of people have issues with, but I feel that they have reinvigorated one aspect of Judaism that is missing for some people is the Reform movement. The Reform movement, with all its problems, it gives some type of an identity and some type of an energy to people who are more secular or less religious. In Israel, they don't accept them because they say that they're not legit or religious enough. But in America, they're the largest movement, so they should be taken seriously to a certain point. They came from the 19th century. Their principles were trying to legitimize Jewish life in modernity, and in relation to European and American perspectives. So just as Christianity was going through changes from the Enlightenment to more modern time, the Jewish community went through a change when they were freed through the French Revolution and given rights to Napoleon, and then they were seeking to become more modern and more accepted in the fold of humanity. So they did away with a lot of Jewish requirements because they wanted to just be accepted. So some people, that's like the worst thing that can happen, but you gotta look at it historically. And they said that they tried to dispel accusation that Jews were not faithful or loyal to the countries in which they lived, since they were a distinct ethnic national group. So a big issue that I see is that the Orthodox community stays insulated, and they don't get involved in political life too much. Some of them do. Then you don't know what's going on. You don't know if they're coming after you. You don't have a say in the issues that are happening. The Reform are very involved. The emerging Reform movement stresses Jewish identity on the basis of religious belief only, and sought to dispel the view that Jewish identity was tied to either existence of Jewish state or the expected messianic redemption, which could culminate in the restoration of Israel. So just like Christianity teaches that through faith you're saved, they were saying that Judaism is a faith in itself, and that ethical monotheism is the way to go. So if you were to water down Judaism to like basic concepts, that's what they were doing. They're like, what's the most important thing? And I think it matters because, like we talked last time, there are religious people who don't believe in God or don't care for him. So if you're a religious person and you keep all the commandments, but the commandments have no value or they have no foundation to come from, I think it loses its meaning. Well, they were saying, let's focus on the main tenets. And now they allow room for diversity and observance. So the main tenets are living a moral life. Like in the passage of Micah, it says, you should walk humbly, love justice, love mercy, love justice, and walk humbly before your God. So basic tenets is what they focus on, and that you could become a Jew just by accepting those tenets without having to partake of all the Jewish rites and religious observance. And the Reformists instead sought to characterize Judaism as a faith compatible with modernity, whose principal tenets could be summed up in the term ethical monotheism comparable to monotheistic faiths. To those who argued that Jews could never truly be loyal to the state or true citizens of the country, Reform Judaism responded by emphasis on the spirituality of Jewish identity. The Reformers, however, severed peoplehood from their definition of Jewish identity and hence lost a critical component of Jewish identity. So peoplehood again has to do with like a sense of community, a sense of being part of the greater Jewish people. So now if you make it only about religion or only about faith, then your covenant membership is all personal. And that's why they emphasize personal decisions, and they cannot impose, if someone wants to keep kosher, if somebody doesn't, if somebody wants to live a life a certain way, they cannot impose that. They give the individual complete authority making decisions of what defines Jewish identity for them. But the basic thing for them is that we all believe similarly. Jews were to view themselves as loyal Germans, Austrians, etc., of other respective countries, but of the Jewish faith. So just in America, you can have people who are Muslim or Jewish or Native American, but we're all Americans. So I think it helped take away there's this conspiracy that's going on for centuries where Jews are never seen as real Germans or real Americans, that they have a cabal of people who are either trying to take over or they're trying to separate themselves and be a unique nation. And we are a unique nation, but we're also part of the world. So people who assume that the Jews are not loyal to their country. So we're trying to dispel that. Political realities and anti-Semitism highlight the problem which is severance of Jewish identity from its connection to the land of Israel might entail. What's funny is that just like the Anusim, who became Christians to not be persecuted, they were still persecuted as not real Christians. The Reform became less religious and more nationalistic towards their home country to be more accepted, and they were still hated, and they were still killed during the Holocaust. So no matter what we do, we bear the brunt of people's insecurities about themselves. Reform Jewish leaders of the 1930s realized this problem, and they had a reproach towards the state of Israel. Like, there was actually a division between some of them supporting the state of Israel or not. The challenge of the reform movement was that in the increasing diminution of the observance of tangible mitzvot, has also weakened the religious identity of its adherents. So then if you take away the commandments, then Jewish identity is free flow to the point of it's not going to be passed on to the next generation because it doesn't matter anymore. And then ethnic and racial identity had a lot to do with the Cultural Revolution in the 60s and 1970s, largely connected to various racial and ethnic minority power movements, like I mentioned. So it became a cultural element. So they perceive Jewish in terms of membership in a variety of Jewish institutions, such as the Jewish Community Center, Jewish Federation. Each definition has major weakness. The racial or ethnic definitions quickly lose validity in light of the very visible ethnic and racial differences between Ashkenazic and Sephardic communities, or as extreme, for example, between Ethiopian and Russian Jews. So if you make Judaism an ethnicity, like some people have had with the DNA and genetic tests and stuff like that, then how are you able to prove that you have a Jewish identity if Jews are from all different colors? There's Jews from Asia and Jews from Africa. The majority of what we know here in America are the Eastern European. But if you go to Israel, the Sephardic Jews or the Middle Eastern Jews, they hold a big chunk of the people there. So you have people from all different racial or skin colors, and now you're trying to say that we are an ethnic group just like African Americans or Latinos. And I see it as similarly with Latinos. People claim that Latinos are all the same. We have people from all different shades, from all different backgrounds, from all different parts of the world who ended up in Latin America. Similarly with the Jewish people, and it becomes it's not that easy to identify people based on their looks or their genetic makeup, because again, Judaism is a religion, so you can convert into it. So just like an Asian person can move to Mexico and become a citizen and have children, and their children are Mexican, and they come to America and they're like, no, you're not Mexican, you're Asian. The same thing could come. So they do a DNA test. Does it prove they're Mexican? No, because they have Asian ancestry. So the same thing would go for a Spanish person who moves to Latin America and then they come to America and they were Spanish Jew originally, but how can you show that they're Spanish Jewish if there was Visigoths and Romans and people who converted throughout the years? But we'll talk more about that later. The cultural argument also loses basis on validity with language and cultural differences between various Jewish communities, also taken into consideration. So, Jews speak all different languages. Mostly Hebrew as the basic language, but you have people who speak Latino, Judaism-The, Yiddish. So if we say, we're all Jews because we all speak Hebrew, well, that's not always true. Membership in Jewish community organizations is largely open to anyone. So definition of Jewishness solely dependent on the facet is pointless since it includes non-Jews and fails to articulate a distinction of Jewish identity. So you go to the Jewish community centers, people from all over the world that go there because they like the gym or they like the yoga classes or whatever. So you can't just say it is the Jewish community center because it was established by Jews, but they have to be open. And that's one of the issues that the state of Israel is dealing with. It's the democratic country. So they should be open to anybody to migrate there, but now they're trying to keep the numbers high on Jews and low on foreigners. The theological approach, each of these approaches defines aspects of Jewish identity which have been understood throughout history by various Jewish communities. But non-religious or non-theological ideals fail to justify and articulate what makes a Jew distinctive and what purpose Jewish identity serves. So if your Jewish identity is only based on culture or ethnic makeup or peoplehood or nation state, then what's the point of being Jewish? Like, you can be German or you can be American or you can be anything else. So the religious perspective claims that their way of defining a Jew is superior. A lot of people don't like that when you start using the word superior, or if you compare all different religions, Judaism is more special to us than other religions. Like, well, what makes you so special? Well, because we think it's special, just like everybody else thinks they're special. So the religious thing always goes back to, we feel that we have a special connection with God and that it's ancient and millenary. Some theologically based definition, such as the initial Reformed position, also fail to take into account the idea peoplehood and their definitions. Even the halakhic definition, which was predominant for so long through religiously based, does not express the seminal definition and purpose of Jewish identity. So then if you become too legal based regarding your Jewish identity, then you lose the spiritual component of it. So again, if it's only through conversion and through motherhood that you're Jewish, then what about the kavanah? What about the intention behind being Jewish? What about the responsibilities and the desire to serve God and please Him? More specifically, the definitions of Jewish life cannot be understood and appreciated outside the relationship of the Jewish people to the exodus from Egypt and the theophanic experience at Sinai. So the exodus of Egypt is the crucial point of Jewish history where God intervened and brought us out of slavery and built a nation for us and gave us the 10 Commandments. The theophanic experience at Sinai is that the coming down of God and the covenant being established. The connection of God as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and consequently the people of Israel, must be fundamental to a meaningful definition of what is a Jew. Regardless of denominational affiliation, any definition that fails to appreciate the centrality of this fundamental principle does little to establish the purpose and existence of Jewish life. So the Torah teaches that the purpose of being Jewish, or a worshiper of God, is to glorify Him, to honor Him, and to make an impact on the world by sanctifying time and sanctifying the land and sanctifying your life. So if you make it just like, oh, we're just Jews like anybody else, anything else, then it takes away the preciousness of it and the purpose behind it. A major problem with these approaches is that they like the Zionist perspective, do not address the reason for Jewish existence. Secular approaches based on cultural linguistic basis can also fall into the trap of not recognizing the difference between the great secular literature figures of recent days and to our revelation. There are some people who are very poetic and they say, well, just as we have great poets, we had great prophets. So people that write poetry right now in Hebrew or about Jewish topics, they're fantastic. They're inspired by God, just like people who wrote the Torah. For religious people, you can't compare one with the other. Jewish or Hebrew culture cannot substitute the Torah. That being said, the definition offered by the great late Byron Sherwin, he says that the validity of the points expressed by various approaches and movements while rightly emphasizing the underlying theological definition of who's a Jew. He offers the following. A Jew is a member of a covenantal community known as the people of Israel, who is bound to his collective consciousness through memories of his historical expressions. So that's a loaded quote from Rabbi Sherwin, but what he's saying is that the experience of the Jewish people, either through the expulsion of Spain or the Galut, we've been in the exile that we've been in for 2,000 years, or the establishment of the state of Israel, the persecution of medieval times, or the battle with the Romans, all that stuff is part of our consciousness. It's something that we all have experienced or have shared through reliving it through the Passover, reliving it through Hanukkah. So all that, and then we have the memories related to that. We're all connected collectively to the challenge of being a Jew in a non-Jewish world. And we're a covenantal community. Like I've said, we're the people who made a pact with God. So without that, Jewish identity falls apart. So again, we're trying to build people and give them an understanding that comes from a Jewish perspective regarding their identity. In contrast, for example, the various national ethnic groups which are presented in the Torah talks about the Egyptians, the Canaanites, the Ethiopians, the Jebusites, the Philistines. They're all Aboriginal, like they're where they live, and they the Hebrew Israelites they settle, they move around, they go to Egypt, they come back and conquer, but they're always a nation no matter where they're at, and they're ratified as a nation in Sinai, and they renew their nationality through prophets like Joshua, Hezekiah, Josiah, Ezra, and Nehemiah. Rabbi Shurman proposes this definition, which recognizes the various claims and approaches of aforementioned movements to the Jewish identity: historical, cultural, linguistic, ethnocentric, while clearly emphasizing the Jews are differentiated and created by the covenant encounters recorded in the Tanakh and the ongoing dialogue with God in the subsequent generations. So, some religious communities claim that covenant was renewed with them through their faith and certain individuals. Judaism teaches that covenant is renewed by us, by our actions and the way that we embrace our identity and participate in Jewish life cycle and Jewish connection with the rest of our people. So we are renewing the covenant all the time by keeping the mitzvot and seeking God. Shurman's definition lends credence to the view that Jewishness cannot then be reduced to purely halakhic status. So there's the theological aspect of it is the center of a Jewish identity. So without God being part of our call to live a holy life as Jews, then it becomes kind of like a pointless endeavor, because God should be central to what we're doing, and it should be the one who re-energizes us to participate in this lifestyle. We're going to open it up for questions. Our only student this time. I know it's a lot that I've been covering. You have any thoughts about this, Alejandra? If you can unmute it.
Not at this moment, really. Okay. In regards to sanctifying land and time, where would that leave me as a woman? Like, if I know that the mitzvahs aren't really time constraint for me, or am I completely wrong about that?
So, like, which ones? Are you talking about prayer? Or are you talking about because of your responsibilities with your daughter? Like, what specifically?
Prayer and like the commandments that are time constrained.
Okay. So, every time you read something that is orthodox, they always say, well, for women it's different, and like they try to like differentiate. But there are some things in Talmud that say that women are not required to do because of the responsibilities. So the ultimate goal is that a woman's opportunity within Judaism is to teach the children. So if you're teaching your children the commandments, you are fulfilling your purpose. There's also a lot of other commandments that are not specific to praying and saying blessings, but such as being loving, being kind, being respectful, honoring your parents, finding peace in your household and with your spouse. So there are ethical things that we can all keep. And I think that, all of it matters, but if there are certain things that you struggle with, you read Maimonides and he says that if you're sick, you get some time off from prayer because you need to get well first, and then you can go back to prayer. Where the Orthodox community nowadays says, no, pray anyway, even if you're sick. So there's this emphasis on doing things, and that's great because we should keep ourselves busy and doing godly things. But if you, if you have certain things that hold you back from fulfilling what you think is important, I think that it should never be felt like a burden. It should feel like an honor or an opportunity to commune with God. So is there something specific that you've been struggling with that sometimes you're not able to achieve?
Yeah, I kind of get confused on like the times and the prayers, like, and if I'm supposed to be doing stuff and if I'm not supposed to be doing stuff because I'm a woman, and like I just want to understand like the mitzvahs that I have to fulfill. That's it.
Well, if you have time, if you you can do it as a practice with your child, that you can say some blessings, some prayers in the morning. Same thing when you eat, you can say some blessings, so then the kid becomes familiar with it. For me, I think it would be difficult to teach someone something that you don't do yourself. And then you have a daughter, just like I have daughters. So, but the emphasis should be on Shabbat and kashrut. So if you're able to teach your child how to say a blessing for Shabbat, or how to have a peaceful environment during Shabbat, and try to cut down on distractions, if you try to eat in a way that it is more sanctified. There's a lot of issues with bread and wine and juice and separation of items, and we can go into all that later. But for them to be aware that there's a distinct way that we eat compared to other people, and that we do that because we've been told by God that it's important. And there's spiritual aspects related to the separation of the foods, or the waiting when you eat one and then you eat the other. All those things can help you kind of engage that. But most of all is, again, the education. So we can go through all the laws of kashrut, all the laws of Shabbat, all the different requirements or things that people assume that Jews should do, but then what are Jews really required to do? Again, if you only see it as requirements and responsibilities, sometimes it can get a little disheartening. But if we see it as opportunities to participate in the work of God in the world, then they become more exciting. If the Jewish identity aspect of it, I've gotten into debates before about, can you do those things even though someone hasn't fully acknowledged the Jewish identity, or they haven't been accepted to a community, stuff like that. Everything is like training wheels. So if someone is building up their Jewish identity, is realizing that there are things that should be different, the things that should be special. And Friday night should be a special night that is kept for a special purpose. I know for a lot of people growing up secular, Friday night is time where you go have fun and you don't stay home. So having to become disciplined where you have to change your lifestyle, that's a big challenge and a big hurdle for a lot of people. Putting all your emphasis on Saturday instead of Sunday, that's a huge hurdle for a lot of people, because everybody's used to having family time on Sunday. Well, for Jews, we have family time on Saturday. So getting your mind to switch, and then also being able to take the holidays off, having your whole family on one accord regarding the things that need to be done before Shabbat. There's a lot of elements, and I honor the work that women do when it comes down to preparing the home and stuff like that. If they're stay-at-home moms, if they're working, there's even more challenges, because there's certain expectations that people have about the role of women and the role of men. And those are things that each family has to decide how they're going to be able to achieve that. And then most of all, there's a lot of different mentalities regarding the covering of the hair for a married woman, or the time of separation between a woman having her period and being and recovering from that, and having time together as a couple. There's a lot of things that can be discussed specifically with the leader of your community. And that's the other thing, like, as much as we want to educate people and give them the tools for them to be able to pray on their own and have their own Jewish household, we also want to encourage people to sit under the feet of scholars. So connect with a rabbi, with a Torah scholar, with a chaplain or a spiritual leader who can help you work through all these things, because the Jewish community is a community. It's not a Lone Ranger kind of affair. And I know there's people online that you can listen to But that should not take away from the personal aspect of having someone that you can count on and call or email regarding different questions. We're here as support. We're here to provide opportunities for growth and understanding, and for people to be open about their struggles as well. But most of all, regarding the Jewish identity thing, there's a lot of strange things out there where people are being given this false understanding of what it means to be Jewish. Because what I've experienced in the past is people say, normative, everybody in the Jewish community would agree with this, is that if you consider yourself Jewish, that's wonderful, but does the Jewish community consider you Jewish? And there's people who you're never going to please and you're never going to make happy, but the way to survive or to be able to express a true Jewish identity is to know what you're talking about. So if someone asks you, are you familiar with Jacob Neusner? Yes, he's one of the scholars who made the Mishnah and the Talmud more accessible to the Jewish people. Okay, well, you have to be aware and understand, things that are important to Jews, such as scholarly works. If someone asks you, where were you at Passover last year? You say, oh, well, I went to someone's house or I visited the synagogue. So just the person on the street would ask you even strange things like, did you have a bris? Did you have a bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah? Things that as a crypto Jew or someone coming from an outside community, you might not have experienced. And then they start to scrutinize you about other things. But if you participate in that and you learn about that, then it becomes resolved, and then it doesn't become an issue. Because the majority of the people are not even that religious to begin with. So we should make our best effort to build up our identity, to create within us a sense of security and not feel like unstable in who we are. And we should build up those experiences and that understanding, so then we can stand our ground and not be bullied or taken off guard by people who might not even understand what Judaism is all about, but they want to prove something, or they want to trip you up or something like that. And so that's why we want to keep on learning together and creating that ability to not let that happen. Alejandra, do you have any more questions or about what I was just saying? Comments?
Actually, no, I don't. Thank you. I think you clarified it for me.
Okay, yeah, and we can talk more about it. I've done quite a little bit of research regarding women's studies in Judaism, so I can get you in touch with some books, and we can talk about it in another class specifically about what are the requirements for women in religious communities in the Jewish world. And so we're gonna wrap it up for today. I want to thank everybody for watching our class. If you can please comment, share this with your friends, and try to build up this community. I would love to have as many people as possible in the live class every Thursday night at 7:30. And if you have any questions or anything, you can shoot us an email. And our email is in Spanish, so if you can bear with us, it's cryptojudíos@gmail.com. That's crypto with an I, CRIPTOJUDIOS @gmail.com. cryptojudíos@gmail.com. Thank you for your time, and shalom.